Welcome to our Free Speech Zone, where we do a deep dive into trauma and reintegration. This is Combat Citizen. Welcome back to the Combat Citizen Trauma and Reintegration podcast, where we do a deep dive into your trauma and then your reintegration. So thank you for your likes and your subscribe. Just keep subscribing, liking, and sharing this podcast. I want to get it out as far as we can. So with that being said, I've got a special guest here. He actually runs an organization called Gallant Few. So it's a little bit different than we've done before, but still the same concept. So what I'm going to do is start it out with, his name's Karl Monger and his organization. So I guess started out with talking a little bit about the organization.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be on the show. Appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Gallant Few has been around for 10 years. It started built off of a network of Army Ranger veterans, mostly from the 75th Ranger Regiment. And our initial intent was to make sure that none of them left active duty and went home and had to go through their transition by themselves, right? So if you were in the Army, you know what a battle buddy is, or a Ranger buddy. If you're in the Navy, you got a swim mate or a shipmate, or whatever your individual branch calls it. They're all a little bit different, but they have the same concept. You have somebody that watches your back, that challenges you, motivates you, kicks you in the butt if needed. And that goes on all the time on active duty with the Ranger Regiment, right? Because you're always trying to keep up with the guy or now gal that's to your left or right. And then when you go back to Chicago or Atlanta or Dallas or Los Angeles, you don't have that anymore. And the people, when you come from that, particularly that high-paced environment, back to a community where people are more out for themselves, they don't seem to care to serve others and to really be part of community, then it can be really disheartening. And that process, and combined with a number of things, unrealized expectations or maybe unrealistic expectations through the TAP program when they go through the training, when they get out of the military, to not being able to connect when they get home, to thinking that their job or their education is going to be purpose like being in the military was purpose. And all of those things start to pile up and create issues. And when those issues, you can almost follow a menu of issues that start with just not fitting in. Even if you grew up in the area, you go back, your buddies aren't the same unless they served in the military and had similar experiences. So you start maybe withdrawing from them, potentially start drinking more, may have difficulty with education or job. The VA may be jerking you around on a disability rating, or maybe they didn't pay you on time for school, so there's money problems. And the combination of those things often leads to relationship problems. And when that significant other says, this is it, I'm done, then that veteran is probably thinking about ending their life. So it's a very predictable path. And some veterans go through a little bit and then they do fine. Some veterans just like downhill ski to crash at the end. And so when we initially set it up with Rangers, it's like, hey, we know this is going to happen. The whole military is built on this process of after action review, right? If you were in the Army and you learned react to ambush, or if you ever jumped out of airplanes and you learned the immediate action drills for malfunction, you got to practice those things because somebody else back in history experienced it, survived, and came back and said, hey, dude, do this to survive an ambush, or do this, to survive a parachute malfunction. And so you practice those things. So when they happen, you're ready. You recognize, you respond, you got your battle drill. But who talks transition battle drills, right? Yeah. We know the VA is going to screw you over. We know you're not going to fit in at home. We know you're going to drink too much, but we don't say, hey, watch for these things and here's what to do if they happen. So that concept is what really led into Gallant Few becoming a nonprofit 10 years ago. And then one of my best friends was an infantry officer, never jumped out planes, never did any special operations stuff. And he said, hey, your concept works for any veteran. Why keep it just to Rangers? And I think his exact words were, what are you doing for veterans like me? So I said, okay, well, we'll try and help any veteran, any branch, any era that we can within our capacity. We started off all volunteers. Now we've got 6 staff members, 2 of which are little part-time assistants in some different things. But there's 4 of us that are providing a pretty hefty caseload. I think this year so far, we've about 250 new veterans have come into our system.
Oh,
And
wow.
we've provided nearly 500, well, more than 5, I'm sorry, almost 500 total veterans. So we've got some veterans from previous years that we're still engaging with. And I think we're up to somewhere around 1,100 services that we've provided so far. And those services range from getting connected to a network that may lead to a job, to we may have to pay somebody's phone bill for a couple of months so that they can get a call for a job. Maybe an educational referral, maybe kicking them in the butt. You know, it just depends on what's going on with their individual situation.
I mean, I can agree with the organization, you know, because I've reached out. I don't exactly remember the whole instance of reaching out and talking with you now, but you know, it definitely improved, I think, my outlook and figuring out where I was going, you know, and leading.
You know, we all have it internally, right? We all, anybody that has joined the military since I think 1972 did it because they decided to, not because they got a letter in the mail that said, we just decided you're going in the military.
Sure.
So, you know, it's the kind of person, whether they're pursuing the educational opportunity or whether they just want to be in the military or whatever that is, but there's something about that person that volunteers, leaves the safety of home and puts themselves in a situation where they have a higher likelihood of dying at work than somebody who, you know, goes to work at a factory or a restaurant or something. So it's a different breed of person. And when you leave the military, sometimes you need somebody else from the military to reignite that spark of whatever that is in you. And once that little spark is lit, then you're rocking and rolling and you're on your own. You find purpose, you get a mission again, and you're moving.
Sure.
And it really, in a lot of situations, can be just that simple. There are others that have taken, you know, we like to talk to about being on azimuth. So if you've ever had to follow a compass heading, you know what it's like to follow an azimuth. And if you get off of that azimuth for a long period of time, you're lost.
Sure.
And when you leave the military, you got this azimuth that the TAP program gives you that's probably worthless. You can just about throw it out the window from day one because it doesn't work. And so you're already off azimuth. But if other veterans can help you get back on azimuth quick, then you can accelerate into civilian life. We've worked with Vietnam veterans who've been off azimuth for 40 years.
Oh gosh.
And you know, they've been married 5 times and they have alcohol and substance use issues, and they just need somebody to come alongside them, remind them who they are, bring them back to what it was that made them part of the military, that made them feel a part of that team, and then help recreate a sense of purpose and mission. And then things start to reset.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, because I know when I originally reached out, and then you had given me suggestions on things that, you know, needed to be worked on. And then I wouldn't say fell off of the radar per se, or I didn't necessarily do as much as I probably should have. But then, you know, you kind of checked back in, and then I kind of redirected a little bit more, and then it led to me to, you know, communication with other vets, and you know, and leading.
Well, look at this. What a purpose you have with this podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really enjoyed our initial conversations, because, you know, it definitely, like you're saying, I mean, it got me back on azimuth, because, you know, when I got out of the military, I didn't want to have anything to do with anybody, you know, because of my experiences.
Which is normal. But believe it or not, that's normal. And that's one of the things that, you know, I talked about Rangers initially, right? So why do most Rangers leave the Ranger Regiment? Most of them leave the Ranger Regiment because they got hurt, which is a physical failure, because my back couldn't handle it, my knees couldn't handle it, so I failed. Or a buddy got killed or significantly wounded, so, you know, I failed because I should have protected them. Or they have difficulty dealing with some of the things that they've experienced, and they may drink or they may do drugs. And then that creates a problem, whether they pop on a urinalysis, or they get a DUI. But all of those things, guess what? You're out, right? And so now you have this profound sense of failure. And even though you were a part of the most elite unit in the world, now you're a failure. And you want to withdraw. You don't want to associate with other people that are so much like you, because you don't want to go through the story of why you left the military. Right? I left the military. I want to make sure everybody understands up front. I have credit with a combat deployment during Desert Storm, but I never got shot at. Don't have a combat infantryman's badge, right? And I left active duty a year after that because we had a helicopter crash that killed 12 of my friends. And it took a long time for me to be able to tell people I got out because the deaths of those men impacted me so deeply that I could no longer put being a Ranger above being a dad to my kids. So I had to quit. And I didn't want to tell people that. When I bumped into other Rangers, they're like, "Oh, wow, you were a captain in a Ranger battalion. Why'd you get out?" God, now I got to remember the deaths. I got to
go back into the story and
so it took a long time for me to realize that it was very important for me to tell that story, and to be able to come to grips with, it wasn't shameful that I left. It was something that was important for me in my family and in moving forward into my future. I made some big mistakes as I transitioned, a lot of which, talked about the AAR stuff earlier, I try to pass along to veterans now. But it's coming to grips with that, and telling your story is incredibly important, both for your own healing and for other people to understand the meaning of sacrifice in the military. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to speak to some young kids. By young, I mean about to enlist in the military. And when they tell me what they want to do, I'll be very upfront with them, because in some ways I push them a little bit, because, it's sexy to want to be a SEAL or a Ranger or a Green Beret. Right. And when I say, are you prepared to not have a family? Are you prepared to watch one of your buddies die? Are you prepared? Can you, I'm almost 60 years old. Let's go for a run. Can you keep up with me? And if they're like, yes, I am, let's go, then okay, I'll refer you, I'll help you. But if they're like, I don't know, then it's like, you better pick a different line of work, because you're heading for an issue.
Well, if you're not 100% into what into that situation, what's going to happen, then there's no reason.
Yeah, it's not Call of Duty.
No, not even by far. No. Okay, so let's
went down a tangent there. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's it all works out in the end. So let's go back. Let's do this. So let's go back to before you got in the military. So kind of describe a little bit about yourself, and then we'll lead it into why you chose getting into the military, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So thanks for letting me tell my story, by the way.
Yeah.
I spent 10 years on active duty. We'll get into why I went in the military in a minute. Is that right? Okay.
That's fine.
So 10 years on active duty as an infantry officer. And I always figured, hey, if I'm going to go in the Army, I might as well be as much Army as I can be. So I volunteered for Airborne School, I volunteered for Ranger School. And then I saw, when I was stationed then it was Fort Lewis, now it's Lewis McChord Joint Base. But when I was at Fort Lewis, I saw the 2nd Ranger Battalion there. I saw their soldiers, some of them that had been released for standards or for injury or for alcohol offense, came to my unit. So I saw the caliber that they were, even though they had these events that happened that caused them to have to leave the unit or were kicked out of the unit. They were still superb individuals. Right. But I thought, man, I don't think I'm on that caliber as a leader. I don't know that I can keep up with these guys running, carrying the weights. I don't know if I can do that. And so I spent 3 years there at Lewis, and then went through the advanced infantry officer training, and then went to Hawaii, where I had the privilege to command a company of infantrymen. And a lot of and I got to back up and say that veterans at that point, the leaders that were instrumental to me as a young lieutenant were all Vietnam veterans. 2 of my squad leaders in my platoon that I led were Vietnam veterans. My platoon sergeant was a Vietnam veteran. The battalion commander and the battalion command sergeant major were Vietnam veterans. and they had survived all of the crap that happened as Vietnam ended and the force shifted from draft to volunteer. And there were, I mean, that if you haven't ever looked at that, that period of time was absolutely horrible for the military. Drugs were rampant, disrespect. People didn't care about rank. It was the two battalion commanders before when I got there, had one of them had done an Article 15 non-judicial punishment against a soldier in the battalion, and that soldier in the battalion tracked him down on the weekend while he was riding his bike and shot that lieutenant colonel for giving him an Article 15. Right. So I mean, that's the kind of environment that I was going into. So then I go to Hawaii, and when I get to Hawaii, because it was a light infantry division, had lots of ranger coded slots. You could not be a green tabber, meaning leading troops at squad up to brigade level, unless you had a ranger tab. So not all of my squad leaders, but I got a bunch of them into Ranger School. My platoon sergeants, my platoon leaders, my company first sergeant, all graduates of Ranger School. My platoon sergeant, or I'm sorry, my company first sergeant had been a platoon sergeant at the 3rd Ranger Battalion. My battalion commander there had been a company commander and a battalion executive officer at a Ranger Battalion. And so now I'm getting inculcated into this, the culture. And after about 6 months, my battalion commander called me in the office and said, "Hey, if you want to put in a packet for the Ranger Regiment, I'll support it, because I think you'd be good there." And so I was very flattered, put my packet together, and ended up getting selected, and then went and spent 3 years at the 1st Ranger Battalion in Savannah, Georgia. And that was, I have to say, commanding a company of infantrymen, that is the best job in the Army. That was absolutely, by far, I treasure every bit of that, the good stuff, the bad stuff. It was phenomenal. And I got to do it for over 20 months.
Oh, wow.
But serving in a Ranger Battalion for 3 years develops you personally and professionally like no other place, because everybody there's a volunteer. Nobody has to be there. And if you screw up, you're gone. If they don't like you, you're gone. It's a very, very strange environment like that. And it's hard to survive there. 12 months there is considered really good, right? And there's a lot of wear and tear on your body.
Sure.
So anyway, 3 years there. In October of 1992, we were rehearsing what was supposed to be a real world raid to go grab something, whether it was Saddam Hussein or weapon of mass destruction evidence, but we were going to go grab something in the Middle East. And Air Force Special Operations Black Hawk, in the middle of the night, crashed into the Great Salt Lake, killed 2 Ranger Battalion commanders, a Ranger First Sergeant, an Air Force Special Tactics Squadron commander, 5 other Air Force combat controllers, and 2 Ranger RTOs. But for the grace of God, I wasn't on that helicopter, because I was the assistant operations officer. I traveled with the battalion commander a lot. And so it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And we just had on the news, I saw this Marine Corps amphibious vehicle that went down, and I think 8 were lost on that. 8 were killed, and they still, 7 or 8 of them, they can't find the bodies yet because they're at the bottom of the ocean. And I know what that feels like, to not know where your buddies are, to know that they're somewhere in that water and they can't find them, because it took a week or 2 before they were able to recover all of our guys. And I mean, that's just, it's absolutely horrible. And the whole, a month after that was, I only remember bits and pieces of it, other than just the overwhelming grief. And as we went through the services and buried them all, it put things into a really stark perspective for me. And as I looked at my kids, who were the same age as kids of some of the men that died, and I knew that their dads weren't going to be there for them, I said, well, I'm going to be here for my daughters. And so about 6 or 7 months later, I made the hard decision to get out. And got out, went back to Wichita, Kansas, where I grew up, and found that it was not the same place that I had come from, or I wasn't the same person that had come from there. And fitting in there was extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you come back, or at least get out of the military, and it's having to deal with people that you've dealt with before, and then I mean, you were active duty. Like I was National Guard active duty, so I at least was coming back home, and dealing with this, the I wasn't on a base or anything like that, but yeah, I can definitely attest to like when I got done with the military and coming back out and just trying to deal with the same people was just, you're different, you're mentally different, and it was quite the reintegration.
Well, and I think National Guard and reservists have a harder time because when you go on a deployment and you come back, you fragment,
Yeah.
right? So you're gone for a month until you see each other again.
Mhm.
And so processing the things that you experienced is difficult. And going back to your job at the hardware store or whatever it is,
Mhm.
that's extremely difficult to make that change. When I came back from Desert Storm, we were all together, right? We had a big party. So, we're all
Yeah.
still there. We're all going through the same thing together. And when I started this, I thought, I don't need to worry about National Guard and reservists because, they got their families, they got their support system, they got their jobs. And boy, in the first year, I found out they're, and in many cases, I think the transition experience for them is more difficult than it is for active duty because they don't have that same support.
Well, it's that, and also for me personally, that you know, I went back to, because when I got back from deployment in 2015, we had about 3 weeks because I was working full time. So I was National, or I was active Guard Reserve. So I had about 3 weeks before I went back to full time, and even at that period of time, it was tough, because I knew, okay, eventually I'm going to be going back to work, but the just the communication styles, and having to, because I literally took 3 weeks to be able to drive again. That was one of the things that, like I had that first week, which was driving around my neighborhood. The second week was driving around my town. And the third week was driving up and down the freeway because I had to drive 45 minutes to get to work. So I wanted to, and road rage, all that stuff, being able to deal with people was different. But I found out, like, when I got out of the National Guard, that I actually was working civilian jobs, and I found out, like, or sorry, even before getting out of the National Guard, I was doing my, 1 week in a month, and I discovered that it's not a good idea to do a civilian job and a drilling weekend on the same day, because I actually did a knife hand to a customer one time. Yeah, it was wonderful, and I literally, like, so the story is, so I'm in Elmer's, and I was working as a host there, and this this gentleman, I was walking around, I was seating people and whatever, and I saw this guy, and there's these crayons on the ground, and he stares at me like, "Are you gonna pick it up?" And I looked at him like, "No, I'm not gonna pick him up. What are you doing?" It was just like this immediate, because I just come out of drill, and so I was working after that, for 3 or 4 hours in the night. And I finally went up to my boss afterwards. I said, "I am so very sorry. I did this. You may have this customer complaining to you. I apologize." And from then on, I didn't work any civilian job after drill. It was just not something, because there's that mindset
Oh, yeah.
change
Yeah.
that occurred, and it was just, or didn't occur, more like it. So,
Yeah. And that mindset is one of the things that I think sets veterans apart as you go forward in civilian life too. I mean, that's when I'm walking down the street, if there's trash, I'm going to pick it up, right?
yeah,
And I'm gonna put it in a dumpster. I went. I don't remember where it was now. It was a year or two ago, but I pulled into a parking lot because I met somebody at a Starbucks for a cup of coffee, and when I walked out, there was like a McDonald's bag that somebody had just thrown in the middle of the parking lot that was getting run over and scattered everywhere. And I went over and I picked it up and I put it over in the trash. And people were looking at me like, "Oh God, I can't believe you
What are you
just picked up
doing?
that trash." And it's like, well, why didn't any of you pick it up? It's clear, come
Yeah.
on.
Well, and it's those things that are drilled into us that are so normal, and I can see, that's a simple thing that we do. So check out my mindsets. So when I worked in Springfield, so I live in Albany and I worked in Springfield. So I was driving 45 minutes back and forth, for work. And so I remember after I got out of work and I'm driving home, there was literally like 30, 45 minutes of my mind it felt like it was switching, like it was going from the military mindset, and I had to make sure that I switched, because when I went back home, I didn't want to treat my wife like like one of my soldiers. I mean, I've tried it a couple times. It didn't really work out.
Didn't work for you? Yeah.
No, when the wife's like, Ryan, no. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, so there was that switch, but not all the time that it occurred. So it was rather interesting, and but getting out was, for me, I gotta say, the best decision, because I got out because mainly politics was one of the things. There's a lot of things that happened, but I was just done with politics, and I just was like, what?
Well, and what you said is key, I think, because you just said getting out for you is the best decision. Mm-hmm. And any person that leaves the military, that needs to be their mindset. Getting out was the best decision that I could have made at that time, because if you fall back into the regret part,
yeah,
why did I get out? Why can't I succeed in the civilian world? Whatever. All that does is drag you back into things that don't help you succeed. So,
sure.
One of the tenets of the philosophy of Gallant Few is, and it can be kind of brutal at times, but what happened to you yesterday, last year, when you were 10, doesn't matter. I really don't care. Right. What I care about is you developing your ability in the next minute, the next hour, the next day, to make a choice that benefits you and your family, that moves you toward whatever your objective is, right? So, I mean, it's horrible if you had a bad experience as a kid and your parents left you and you had to live in an orphanage and you got abused, and then finally maybe you got adopted. I mean, I'm making all this stuff up, right? I'm not saying this is you, Ryan, but none of that matters when it comes to your ability to learn how to have a good relationship, or to hold a good job, or to get your education, or to control your anger, or to not have road rage. But our system is set up, and the VA reinforces this, that, well, of course you have post-traumatic stress. Of course you're angry. Of course you're going to drink. Of course you can't sleep, because of these experiences that you had in the military, whether it was a combat experience or you were abused in the barracks or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And no, I don't buy any of that. Horrible things happen to people all the time. Sure. We have to, and there are probably some people that will disagree with me and take offense at this, and it's not getting over it, right? You don't get over it, but you have to learn how to move forward in a way that's going to benefit your life. Because what's the option? The option is you become a bitter, sour person with broken relationships, and the rest of your life sucks. No.
Yeah, you keep on blaming things all the time.
Yeah. We can't make excuses. And in you talked about mindset earlier, a key mindset is, and this is a self-check, is when you run up into an issue where you're not getting the results that you want. Maybe you're trying to lose weight, or maybe you're trying to get a promotion at work, or maybe you're trying to get an A on a test. Whatever it is that you do, when you don't achieve that, what is the first internal dialogue that happens, right? Because if your internal dialogue says, why didn't I get an A? Why can't I get a promotion? Why can't I lose weight? Mm-hmm. Every one of those why questions starts with the exact same word when it comes to the answer, right? And that word is what? Because. Yeah. You're starting why can't I lose weight? Well, because I like chocolate cake, or because my wife is a really good cook, or because my metabolism is weird, right? It gives you an excuse for it to not happen, because I can't afford a health club membership. Sure. If you and that's the test. If you're asking yourself why questions in your head about anything, I encourage you to switch that thought process to what do I need to do questions? What do I need to do to lose weight? What do I need to do to get in shape?
Yeah,
Right?
I've been using that myself, and it's small example, but because I've been working on a master, or sorry, a bachelor's degree in marketing and leadership, and the degree itself, yeah, it's been tough because it's been online, trying to get it, going and whatever. But I thought I was on point with doing all my assignments this last term, and I went into one of my classes and I'd gotten a grade of a 10 out of 25 for a discussion. And I'm like thinking, dang, I missed that, But my initial next thing was, okay, so what do I need to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? And I made sure to go through all the assignments at that point in time, write a 3x5 card and be like, okay, these are the things I'm getting done, and that instead of going, blaming myself, just working on that next thing that needed to happen.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the kind of mindset you need to have. Mm-hmm. And by the way, OneNote.
Yeah.
Used Microsoft OneNote for class. I'm in graduate school right now. I'm working on my master's in counseling finally this is an example of the mindset, because 20 years ago, I said to myself, well, I should get my master's degree. Right. And then, well, why don't I have a master's degree? Well, because I have a full-time job. Well, because I'm busy. Well, because I have, right. It's all the because answers, which makes it okay to not get a master's degree because of all of these reasons.
Sure.
And we do a thing for free for veterans. It's called functional emotional fitness coaching. And as part of that process, it encourages you to identify the things that are absolute must items in your life that you have to do. Right. And in terms of my self-image and some other things, my absolute must was get my master's degree, because I needed to be more effective in the work that I do with veterans. So for 2 years, I didn't take action on it. And it wasn't something that I was bringing up to the top of my mind. Well, finally, I took a 3x5 card and I wrote on it, what do I need to do to get my master's degree? And I stuck it on the mirror where I brush my teeth. So twice a day, I'm seeing that dang question, what do I need to do to get my master's degree? And so what happens all day long, my brain is like, what do I need to do? So finally, after 2 weeks, I was sick of reading the question, and I Googled, master's degrees, counseling, my area. And I actually reached out to a friend of mine that works at a hospital and said, would you ask your counseling department at the hospital, who locally do they recommend? They said University of North Texas. So I applied, and now I just finished my second semester. So I'm almost halfway through getting my master's degree, which will lead me to my license. But if I had not done that process, I still would be saying, well, one day I'm going to get my master's degree, right? So, but so getting back to where I said OneNote's awesome because you can set up notebooks, you can synchronize it to your tablet or to your phone, and you can have a little notebook inside of OneNote for each one of your classes. And most of my classes, all my classes last semester were online. So you've got the discussion groups you have to do, you have reading assignments, you have tests, you have writing assignments. Wow. So when I put them in OneNote, I check them off after I get each one of them done. And like a discussion group, if it's anything like mine, they throw a question out there, a statement, you have to post on it. Mm-hmm. And then you have to come back like 3 days, different times during the week, to show that you're contributing and you're responding to other things. So I would say, okay, I did it 7:29, I did it 7:30, I did it 8:01. Yeah, so I made sure that I didn't miss any of that stuff, because it's when your life is full and you got a whole bunch of stuff going on, trying to do full-time master's work is that's a challenge too. So I mean, it's management and it works. So
and that'll definitely help me out next, because I just applied for a master's program at Syracuse University. So.
Excellent. That is a great program for veterans, IVMF. Mm-hmm. If you haven't looked at that as a veteran, go check out just Google IVMF and you'll find it. They have free programs for higher education for veterans and families.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look that up. Yeah, somebody told me something about that as well, so I just hadn't looked at it. But yeah, I just got my application, and so I'm now waiting for, it to be reviewed and all that.
Did you do it through IVMF?
No, I didn't actually work through the admissions counselor there for it. So
look at IVMF, because you don't want to pay for it, right? It shouldn't even be GI Bill. They may cover it because they do grants for veterans.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll look at that definitely, because
India Victor Mike Foxtrot, IVMF.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So let's go back a little bit. I want to get back into kind of the pre-military, kind of chat a little bit about that, and then we can kind of we talked about your career a little bit. So I kind of want to know a little bit about you before you got in the military. And
so I was part of the population of trendsetters back in the 60s when I was a little kid. My dad, who ultimately retired from the Army as a sergeant major, he walked out on my family when I was 4, 2-year-old sister. My mom was pregnant. And so for the next 8 years or so, things were really, really tough. Sure. Mom didn't have a college degree, so she's working during the day, going to school at night. When I'm 6 years old, I'm making dinner for my sisters, which today would probably get my mom thrown in jail for child abuse. But back then, I was in charge and she went to school. Yeah. When I was about 9 years old, I got selected. I think actually a police officer told my mom I should do this or I'd be in big trouble. But I became one of the first little brothers in a brand new program called Big Brothers. Oh. And it wasn't Big Brothers Big Sisters, it was only Big Brothers. And so for 3 years, I was matched to an attorney that the first time he came, picked me up, he drove a white convertible Stingray Corvette, which was pretty cool. And so he became a big brother / father figure for me. And I had extended family that also was involved, but that the mentoring aspect of that program was very important to me. And when as I worked my way, going through school, I finally decided that I would go to Wichita State University, and I was going to study aeronautical engineering because Wichita is a big aerospace center, and Boeing and all these big companies were there. So it just seemed kind of natural.
Sure.
As soon as I turned 18 and was eligible, I applied for and I mentored an at-risk youth myself. So I became a big brother for a couple of years while I was in college. I'm walking through the engineering school during enrollment, looking at the fact that I was getting a D in a drafting course because I hated it. It was like scratching my fingernails across chalkboard going to that class. And I saw a sign for a marksmanship class. And I thought, hey, that's an easy A. That'll help offset that D. Well, I didn't realize it was an ROTC class because it didn't say it was ROTC, right? It just said marksmanship. Sure. So signed up for it. And I really liked the other kids that were in the class. And there was at Wichita State, I don't know if they still have it, but underneath the old auditorium that's like 100 years old, there was an underground range. And they had match grade 22 rifles. Beautiful. I mean, these were like Olympic class rifles that the program had. And there was a crusty old Korean and Vietnam War veteran sergeant major that was our marksmanship instructor. And he taught us how to shoot. And they invited me. They had a weekend. They called it a rappelling trip, but it was like a field training exercise for ROTC cadets. Okay. And so I went, and the professor of military science was a lieutenant colonel, Vietnam veteran, Green Beret, served in the 82nd for a long time, Ranger Tab. He looked like John Wayne. He was dynamic. Man. He was, just an awesome leader. And I really enjoyed getting to know him and learning more about the military through him. And then he stroked my ego. And one day he said, you should apply for a scholarship because I think the Army would probably pay for your school. Well, I'm all about getting my school paid for. So, So I applied for it and I got selected. So the Army paid for 3 years of my college. And at the end of that, then you pop out as a second lieutenant. And it's a competitive process when you're coming out of an ROTC program. Each school at that time, it may be different now, but you could apply for, and each school might get one slot for a regular Army officer, which means that new second lieutenant, it's just like they graduated from West Point in terms of their commission. You can't, it's not a reserve commission. It's a regular Army commission.
Oh, okay.
And so I competed for, and I got the regular Army commission. And I remember the very first military school that I ever went to, 1981. I had been in ROTC for all of about 6 months. And I don't even know if I'd signed the contract yet. I did after this, but they came to me and they said, we have a slot for airborne school. Would you like to go to jump school? And I said, sure, I'd like to go to jump school. So I'd never been to basic training. I'd never been to anything. Army Airborne School is the very first school I ever went to. And my hair was down over my ears in 1981. It's not acceptable now. It certainly wasn't then. And I got an education in a hurry when I showed up with long hair.
Oh, geez.
I found that I fit in. I loved it. And I'd maintained physical fitness because I ran track when I was in high school. And so I still ran. So I didn't have any problem with that. And 3 weeks later, I'd graduate from jump school, and that started my transformation. Then the following summer, I tried to get them to send me to Ranger School instead of the ROTC advanced camp, but I couldn't pull that one off. So went to advanced camp. Then the following year, got commissioned as a lieutenant. People ask me what's my degree in college, and I tell them my degree was in second lieutenant because I really didn't care about anything else. My actual degree is administration of justice and criminal science, and with a specialization in forensic investigation. Never used a lick of it, and went in the Army as a second lieutenant, and just Fort Benning, Infantry Officer Basic Course, Ranger School, first assignment, and then through the rest of the 10 years. But the mentoring part of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and the reason I came back to that is so important because when I left the military, I struggled trying to figure out sense of purpose. I got a job working for a construction equipment company selling construction equipment, Case, Ingersoll Rand, big stuff, right? Could make big paychecks doing that.
Sure.
But it wasn't meaningful. Right. It was, in some cases, it was a little bit of a game because you're trying to get the county commission to approve your equipment over somebody else's equipment, who's either one is pretty much, they're going to do the job. Right.
Right.
And so then you get into the whining and dining, and the whole thing was like, this is meaningless. And so it was tough. And it was causing me harm there. And then I had the opportunity. I saw a little ad in the paper that, or maybe somebody showed it to me, but the Big Brothers, now Big Brothers Big Sisters agency that I'd been a kid in was looking for their second executive director in 30 years of existence. And so I called them up and said, hey, I was one of the first little brothers. You want to talk to me? And they said, sure. So they ended up hiring me. So I ran the agency for about 2 years, and wasn't prepared for the nonprofit world, knew nothing about it. Was still very military in my thinking. That didn't work well for me there. So I went back to the construction equipment world until 9/11 happened. And then that drove, that caused me to really, in some ways, we talked earlier about the good decision about getting out.
Sure.
At that point, then I was like, my team is back in combat. I know all these guys that jumped into Afghanistan, and I'm a worthless piece of crap because I quit the Army, and I decided I didn't want to do the hard stuff anymore. And so I went through a period of time there that was difficult. But then I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to start working a network of Rangers, because I knew the things they were going to be faced with as they came out. I knew they weren't going to talk about their physical injuries, their emotional difficulties, their marriages, and they were going to drink a lot to cover that stuff up. And so what can I do to start building a network to help them connect when they come home? It didn't hurt that a friend of mine at that time was the commander of all Rangers, a guy named Joe Votel, who retired as a 4-star general, CENTCOM commander, about, I don't know, it's probably been almost a year now that he's retired.
Oh,
but
wow.
I was still although inactive, I was still in the Army Reserve system, so I had access to email, and I emailed him, and what can I do to support the team? And I went back to Fort Benning and got a chance to talk to him and see some of my friends, and that process is what started building the organization that 10 years later became Gallant Few.
So did you take in some of the aspects of the Big Brother, Big Sister into the Gallant Few?
We've tried to, and with some success and with some failures. But the idea of Big Brothers, Big Sisters is you have someone who's at risk, and you have someone who maybe used to be at risk that now is no longer at risk, right? So from the days that I was there, if you were an African-American boy, single parent, you were going to go to jail. I mean, if you were 8 years old, 9 years old, it didn't matter. At some point, you're going to go to jail statistically. When you put a Big Brother mentor on there, another African-American male who now was an attorney or worked in business or had gotten through that, now it was almost like magic because it would change. That kid would stay in school. If it was a girl, she would not get pregnant. They would graduate from high school, they would move on, and their lives would be different than maybe the way that it was laid out, because they had this example. And they had, when you have somebody that looks at that kid and says, what do you mean you can't do it? I did it. If I can do it, you can do it.
Sure.
So now go into the veteran world. We know that veterans leaving the military are more likely to be unemployed, homeless, or commit suicide than someone who never served in the military. So if you have a Marine that's leaving Camp Lejeune that did a couple of combat tours and now is going to go to Kansas City and wants to get an MBA and own his own business, then I want to connect that Marine with somebody in the Kansas City area who's a Marine veteran who owns a business or is in the corporate world that is able to have a conversation along the military service line, but then also along the professional line. And we helped a veteran a couple of years ago that was, gosh, I can't remember now if it was Army or Marine Corps, but he wanted to be a CPA. He wanted to go into accounting, and he really didn't know where to start or what to do. And so, where do you want to live? And he told me the community. I went in my network and I found a veteran just like him that was now a partner in a CPA firm in that community. And I called that guy up. I'd never talked to him before. I think I found him on LinkedIn, called him up, and I said, hey, there's a veteran that's, like you, but 20 years behind, leaving the Army, got a combat deployment, is thinking about being a CPA. And that guy's like, hey, I know the professor at the school that's going to be in charge of his program. Let me get them talking so I can get him the right kind of guidance counseling. And my CPA firm needs interns during the summer because we have work with taxes and stuff. I know I can give him a job so he can see what goes on. I mean, all of a sudden, all these opportunities just opened up for him. And this veteran that was returning to the community, if he did it all by himself, he might have stumbled across and found this guy, but probably not, right? And he wouldn't have known who to talk to at the school. Maybe he would have had an opportunity for a job later on, but in this case, the veteran was almost sponsored by the CPA firm and then got offered a job when he graduated. So to be able to set up that kind of success. So in the Big Brothers, Big Sisters world, you'd want a case manager that checked in once a month and made sure that, are you meeting and doing. We don't, like I said before, there's not very many of us. And with the numbers of veterans we have, we can't always go back. Like I put tickers in we use Salesforce to manage relationships. And like with you and I, we hadn't talked in a while. So I get a ticker that pops up and says, hey, check in on Ryan. So that reinitiated the conversation, right? So the risk of the downside to that is if you had gotten into an issue and I didn't know, right, then 6 months later, I reconnect with you, or a year later, and you're like, oh man, I really could have used your help 6 months ago. Then I feel really bad because we weren't able to maintain that constant connection. But the reality is when we light that spark and we introduce some people, then we can basically step back and let professionals go. Right?
Yeah, 'cause you introduced me to Sean, and we talk every couple weeks now.
Yep.
Which is been a big, huge help, especially through everything that's going on now.
Yeah, and odds of you meeting Sean just organically wouldn't happen, probably.
No, because he's in a, he's in what, I think Portland or something like that. So he's or different area than I am, and so yeah, I wouldn't have otherwise contacted. But
But the nature of society right now, hey, when I go to the grocery store and I come home, I hit the automatic garage door opener. My garage opens. I drive in. Door closes behind me. I don't have to talk to anybody that lives across the street from me.
Yeah.
There could be a veteran that moves or that lives on my block that I would never know just because the way society is. Now, I'm not like that. I'll go, everybody in my neighborhood knows me because I make sure they do. But most people don't. If you live in an apartment complex, how do you know that there might be a veteran living in the same building as you on a different floor? You don't. And the veteran organizations that are out there, and I'm a life member of the VFW and I'm an annual paying member of the American Legion, they do not do the kinds of things that need to happen to connect those veterans together. So that's what we do, everything we can to create those connections and make sure other veterans know other local veterans, or as close to local as possible.
So I got a question, and I'm going to preface it with something first. But so when I originally came across the idea of wanting to do this podcast, and a couple of the guys that I've talked to on the podcast currently, or kind of dealt with the same thing, but getting out of the military, you didn't necessarily have those connection points. You just got out, you're done. Like one of the guys had said, when he got out, he signed the paperwork. They told him, hey, by the way, you're done. He's asking him, what's my next steps? And they're like, well, your next steps are to walk out that door and through that gate. And
we don't care anymore.
We don't care anymore. And then, I wouldn't say I didn't experience the same exact thing, but I experienced that aspect of, okay, so you get done with, and then you're like, what am I going to do? But I didn't want to talk to anybody, but I didn't know. I mean, I knew there's a VA. I know there's probably other organizations out there, but I didn't know, I didn't have the inclination to reach out to these organizations. So when I finally ended up, reaching out and talking with you, it was great. But it helped to lead conversations into other things, and then eventually thinking, okay, so I want to help other veterans. And for me, that started out as their story. I felt like their story is the most important, because a lot of times guys, they don't know that they haven't talked about their story. They don't know, and they want to keep that to themselves. Or they want to keep it to them and their spouses or their counselors or whoever they're talking to. And, to find a medium to have a medium for them, for me, just felt right. And I've obviously met my producer, Andy, and kind of sparked that idea and led it into this podcast idea. So it leads into my question, the last question I'd like to ask you. So a little bit different from what I usually do, but I kind of like this question. So your organization, what are you thinking are the next steps of things that you want to do to kind of grow your influence or even help more veterans out?
I appreciate you asking that. And let me back up and say that you providing a format for veterans to tell their story is incredibly important, because one of the most healing things that you can do is to tell your story. And not only for you, but for the country, because I look at it, you volunteered for the military and your enlistment's done and you're out, but you're not out.
No.
In my personal belief is there's an expectation that you continue to be a leader, that you continue to make the world a better place. You make your community a better place. You find ways to serve. You've been exposed to some of the best leaders, the best techniques, the best equipment. I mean, there's some crappy stuff too. It's not all unicorns and fairy dust, but it is, you've been given a lot. And a lot of times you don't realize that until much later.
Sure.
But what the general public doesn't understand is the sacrifice. Whether you served as a cook in a mess hall, or whether you launched airplanes off of a aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, your story is important for people to understand what men and women that go into the military experience, right?
Sure.
Because the country right now has no skin in the game for the fact that we've got troops in Syria and Afghanistan and Africa and other places where, when I was in the military during Desert Storm, if one soldier went into a combat zone and it wasn't, secret Delta type stuff, then it was huge news. It was everywhere. And everybody wanted to know, why are those Marines in Beirut? Now, you can't even name all the countries that we have combat troops in that are actively going after and killing bad guys right now. And
Right.
we need them, but our country needs to understand that's what's happening. And they have, whether it's just the political environment or they turn a blind eye, whatever it is, they've washed their hands of any responsibility for that. But the fact that we have troops in Syria is your responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's my mom's responsibility. It's my neighbor's responsibility, because we're citizens of this country, and it's not, a dictatorship, right?
Sure.
So we all have skin in the game, but the only way that we appreciate that is by veterans telling their stories.
Sure.
So it's not only important for the veteran as a healing process to tell their story, but it's important for your community. So let me give you a quick example of how you can do this. Veterans Day is coming up, right? A couple of months. What's your community doing for Veterans Day? And I'm not saying you, Ryan, I'm saying in general, your population out there. What are your communities doing for Veterans Day? Maybe you typically have a Veterans Day parade. Here, I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where if you look at a quilt, there's two big panels of quilt in the middle, and that's Dallas and Fort Worth, and there's all these little communities around it, and I live in one of those little communities.
Yeah.
Dallas does a great big parade. Fort Worth does a big parade for Veterans Day, or they used to. They probably won't this year. But here in my community, I got a couple of veterans together and said, hey, let's do something here. We have a flagpole in our community. Let's find a World War II veteran. Let's find a Korean veteran. Let's find a Vietnam veteran. So we found all these different veterans. We wanted one Air Force, one Marine, one Army. And these guys, it was awesome. And gals, we have a female colonel, Air Force medical professional, who she can still put on her uniform. So she wears her blues with her colonel's wings, and she stands up there and she talks about her experience, why being in the military was important to her. And she tells a story about her experience. Every community, if you're a veteran out there and you live in Timbuktu, Iowa, if there is not something going on in your community, start it. And if there is something going on in your community, get involved and influence it, because they probably have done the same thing the same way for the last 30 years. Change it. Go in and change it. Memorial Day.
Sure.
We didn't do any kind of a Memorial Day observance here in my community. And I suggested it we've got a group of veterans that gets together once a month for breakfast. And I said, hey guys and gals, because they're both men and women in the group. So what are we doing for Memorial Day? So, well, let's go back to the flagpole. Well, why go to the flagpole? There's a cemetery in our town. Let's find out if there's any veterans in the cemetery. Well, lo and behold, it's a little historic cemetery. There's like 65 veterans that are buried there. None of them are war casualties, but there's 65 veterans. So let's do a Memorial Day ceremony there. The first year we did it, it was like a mini Veterans Day ceremony where a couple of veterans stood up and they talked about being in the military. And afterwards, I went up to the organizer and I said, can I run it next year? And they're like, please, we need somebody to take over this thing. So I said, it's going to be different. And I went to an Afghanistan veteran who I knew, one of his buddies had died on a patrol in Afghanistan, Marine Corps veteran. And I said, would you be willing to tell the story of your buddy? And I went to a family whose son was killed in combat, an Army veteran, active duty Army sergeant. And I said, would you be willing to come and tell our town about your son, what he did in school, what he loved to do? Sure. And they loved it. And it was the most emotional, powerful ceremony I have ever been to in terms of a Memorial Day ceremony, because we had a Vietnam veteran that talked about the crew chief in his helicopter that died on a mission that Vietnam veteran wasn't able to go on. And so he carries all this responsibility. But when you say, let me tell you about my buddy Bill. My buddy Bill was 6'2", and he loved to play basketball. And he went into the military because he wanted to fly helicopters. And here's a couple of funny stories where we played a trick on him. But then, on August the 18th of 1973, he died when his helicopter was whatever. And when you tell that story, people are just like, wow. But it brings the sacrifice of service home. It makes it real to them. And now every year the community's like, are we doing this again? Who's going to speak? We want to hear the stories. So, but my point through all of that is, it's easy for us as veterans to just say, well, yeah, if there's a parade, I'll go, but probably not. Don't do that. Get involved. Go find out what's going on. It doesn't matter if your community's got 500 people or 500,000 or 5 million. Go get involved and help influence it, and make sure that the community knows what's going on. There's one thing that I would love for folks that listen to this to get involved in, and would help us. We do an annual fundraising event that's called Patriot Challenge. Okay. It used to be called Run Ranger Run, but not everybody's a ranger, and not everybody likes to run, and run is in the name twice. So Run Ranger Run is changed now to Patriot Challenge. And Patriot Challenge, its mission is to connect America to her veterans. So we want to be able to, through this event where you get other people to sign up on your team, it costs 40 or 45 bucks. You get a t-shirt and access to this website where you can build your team. And then you get other people on your team, and then we're sharing messages about veterans and veterans transition and opportunities for veterans. And every day during the month of February, your challenge is to go do 2 miles of something. Walk, swim, bike, treadmill, stair climb, low crawl, whatever you want to do. But every day in the month of February, go be active. Hey, that can be a challenge when you're in Oregon in February, right?
Yeah.
But you can still do it if you set a plan and you stick to it. And what happens through that month is you change your habits. You get exposed to these messages about nutrition and diet, and your teammates are like, hey, did you do your 2 miles today? They're beating you up if you didn't do your part. But what happens is, this last year, we had 4,000 people across the country that participated in Run Ranger Run. And it was actually global, because we had people overseas that did it too.
Oh, wow.
We had a sailor that did it on a ship by doing laps around his ship in the ocean. And, but 4,000 people got exposed to what we do. And some of them came to us for help.
Sure.
The money that we raised in that event is what allows us to operate during the year. Patriot Challenge, when it comes around in February this next year, registration's actually open now. If you go to patriotchallenge.org, you can find out about the event. But we want to get 10,000 people participate. We want to get 1 million people participating in this, because
awesome.
when we're talking about true veteran issues, and we're talking about what we can do about those veteran issues and how you as a community can get involved, now we raise the opportunities for veterans, and we encourage them. When we tell them, you think about the after action review stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You have lessons learned from your military experience that are valuable for somebody else. You know that when you left the military, you didn't want to talk to anybody. You wanted to go into your shell. You didn't want to share your experience, but you also know that sharing your experience is what cracked open the door and started making you feel more whole, and started giving you more purpose and mission. And it's opened up other opportunities and friendships. And so when you tell that story, and there's a veteran out there that's like Ryan was leaving the military, that's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. But wait, you mean that if I do start talking to people, then doors start opening, right? So you've given them a little battle drill, which is get involved, get out there, tell your story, get connected.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to, reach a lot of people, because I felt like, but just my story alone, talking about my story, and then hearing a lot of other veteran stories. Because I talk with a veteran friend of mine weekly. We work out together, and then we talk about our experiences and whatnot. Is really helps solidify what I'm doing here, because I know that telling your story is about the best thing that I think we can do for ourselves.
And when somebody else says me too,
yeah, and that's exactly why doing the podcast is getting that me too, and eventually leading it into being able to help out the spouses too is kind of something that I eventually want to do. But
there is a huge issue with spouse transition.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing. And I reached out to a couple of people that are spouses, they've been spouses for 21 years, things like that. Is something that I eventually want to work with. This is talking with the spouses of the service members, because they've dealt with stuff too. So, but yeah.
Well, and imagine, and I know we're up at the end of the hour here. Um, a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, has been out of the military for about 4 years, served in the Ranger Regiment, a couple of combat deployments, and was married before they went in the military. And
Okay.
and he said 2 years ago we almost got divorced. And I'm like, whoa, he never said anything to me. Nobody could tell on the outside. He's like, yeah, we were going through a really hard time. And there were, on the lessons learned side, I'll share with them very quickly.
Wow.
When you're in the military, especially if you're deploying, when you come home, it's all romance, it's all quality time. You don't want to fight, right? Because you know that you're probably going to deploy again, or you're going to be gone again. So things, you make things good. And in this case, his wife enjoyed being part of the wives group, right? They had a supportive wives group. Her identity was tied to the fact that her husband is this elite ranger. And then all of that goes away. And now she's like, so my husband's trying to go to school and get a job. But so now she loses her identity as being the spouse of this elite warrior. And so she's trying to figure out her new role.
Sure.
And after a couple of months, there's no deployments going on. So the new of the relationship now starts to kind of wear off. And when he wants to take a weekend to go fishing, she starts to feel resentful because, why do you get to go away and go fishing? And so it starts building all of these things, and they're all predictable. And you can talk about the fact that, you're going to go through an identity crisis that is just as meaningful as the service member, as they go through their identity crisis from this purpose to that purpose. And there are so many things that are woven into that we need to talk about, because we can head off the destruction of some relationships by talking about these things that we know that are coming, and ways that you can deal with them up front.
That would be really cool. And that's an eventual thing that I'd like to be able to add to this. So yeah, appreciate you jumping on this interview here.
Ryan, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah. I talk too much.
No, it's fine. I mean, in reality, it's the soldiers, it's the veterans' time. So I'm just more the facilitator to give, you or whoever else is on the show to be able to communicate their story. So, but I appreciate, everything that you've said. And definitely I'll probably get you back on the show, just because there's plenty of stuff that we can come up with and talk about. So
we'll have to, at some point, I'll do a shameless plug. Let's talk about my book.
There you go.
Available on Amazon. It's even on Audible too, if you like to listen.
Well, if you want to send me the details, I'll post it in the comments.
I'll do it.
We'll do it from there. So
I'll send you a copy of the book too. If I didn't already, I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up our show for today. So I just want to say thank you for all of you that have jumped on and listened on all the different platforms. So just wanted to give a actual plug to our sponsor, BattleBox. So I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but you know what is perfect is the BattleBox, which is the perfect carrying case for, which originally I started was for essential oils. So check out the website. It's battlebox.co. And yeah, so thank you for watching, and just make sure to like and subscribe and to share. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Karl.
Thank you, Ryan.